The stranger arrived in Ashcroft one chill October evening, as a thin fog rolled across the cobbled streets and the lamps flickered weakly against the creeping darkness, and though he came by no herald nor carriage of distinction, he carried with him an air of undeniable authority, a presence that caused the wind to pause in its restless wandering, and the townsfolk, wrapped in their shawls and coats, could not help but steal glances at the tall figure in the long black coat and high-collared shirt, whose eyes, like twin shards of iron-gray crystal, surveyed every detail of their modest town with a combination of interest and imperious indifference, and when he crossed the threshold of the Golden Harp Inn, tipping his wide-brimmed hat with a grace that seemed almost ceremonial, Mrs. Porter, who had tended to travelers for more years than she cared to count, felt a peculiar shiver run down her spine, as though the ordinary laws of hospitality had been suddenly suspended and the room itself held its breath in recognition of some unspoken power. Yet she curtsied and offered him a key to a chamber in the corner, noting with mild astonishment that his manner was at once courteous and reserved, that he did not speak to inquire about the inn or its patrons, but instead, as if by instinct, surveyed the shelves and the hearth with the precision of one cataloguing an unfamiliar yet significant terrain, and it was only when he took pen in hand to sign the register, writing the name Dr. Alaric Vane, philosopher, that Mrs. Porter dared to ask herself whether this visitor was indeed a man of flesh and bone or some spectre of a more learned and sinister sort, for the letters were written with a deliberation that seemed to leave a trace of energy on the page, and though she did not dare voice her suspicions, the very air in the inn seemed charged with quiet expectation, a subtle hum of mystery that made the hairs on her arms prickle. Over the following days, Dr. Vane established a routine of solitary walks at dawn along the river bank, returning at dusk with his eyes glinting as though they had observed the hidden currents of the world, and at night, light flickered from his chamber window, sometimes steady, sometimes pulsing like a heartbeat, and the villagers whispered in hushed tones about the strange sounds and occasional flashes of unearthly blue light they glimpsed from behind curtains, while the apothecary, ever a man of reason, dismissed it as nothing more than reflections of gas lamps, and yet the butcher's boy swore he had seen the window glow like a storm condensed into glass, and the whispers grew into tales of wonder and fear, tales that reached even Reverend Henry Ashe, a man of piety and scholarship, who, despite his calm and rational nature, felt a tremor of unease at the very thought of Dr. Vane's purpose, and so he called at the inn to extend a courtesy of friendship and intellectual kinship, finding the doctor in a chamber crowded with books, papers, and curious instruments whose functions he could not name, and Dr. Vane received him with measured grace, speaking with a clarity and intensity that unsettled the clergyman, as he discussed the latent energies of the human will, the unseen forces that bind thought and matter, and the possibility of bending life and death to one's understanding, and when Ashe departed, he confessed to himself that the conversation had left his mind restless, torn between horror at the implications and fascination at the depth of knowledge displayed, and soon came the Michaelmas fair, when the town gathered under banners of bright cloth and the smell of roasting chestnuts, and among the entertainments was a conjurer from Bristol who boasted of legerdemain and illusions, and Dr. Vane attended, standing silent at the rear of the crowd, observing the tricks with a serenity that contrasted sharply with the red-faced Merryweather, who performed his feats with boisterous flair, and when challenged to surpass the conjurer, Vane produced a crystal sphere that seemed ordinary until it floated from his hand, illuminated with shifting colors that resembled storm clouds and fire in equal measure, and the crowd, caught between awe and terror, could not speak, even Merryweather recoiling with hands trembling as the sphere descended at last into Vane's palm, and he dismissed it quietly as illusion, though the air seemed charged with a power beyond explanation, and the townsfolk, whispering among themselves, felt that something in Ashcroft had shifted, that the ordinary rhythms of life had been pierced by a force both extraordinary and dangerous, and nights later, Reverend Ashe, compelled by curiosity and dread, entered the chamber unannounced, discovering symbols and diagrams upon manuscripts, strange geometries that seemed to warp beneath the lamp's glow, and beside them the crystal sphere, now glowing faintly with imprisoned light, and Dr. Vane, serene and untroubled, spoke of capturing the energy of the soul, of anchoring it to matter, of proving the impossibility of death through will alone, and though Ashe recoiled at the blasphemy, he could not deny the logic of Vane's voice, nor the certainty that radiated from his gray eyes, and on a stormy night, Vane could be seen moving among gravestones at the edge of town, chanting softly, placing the crystal upon fresh mounds of earth, and witnesses later swore they heard the cries of a child, faint, pleading Mama, emanating from the soil itself before the sound was swallowed by thunder and rain, and by morning, the graves bore signs of disturbance though coffins remained intact, while whispers of dread swept through Ashcroft, and the villagers, sensing a danger too vast to confront, looked to the church for guidance, yet Reverend Ashe, pale and shaken, wrote feverishly in his diary, chronicling every oddity, every fear, every sense that the ordinary world had been rent by some other knowledge, and When Dr. Vane departed the inn for the abandoned Ravenscroft Manor, the house of Ravenscroft, reputed to be haunted, he vanished from common sight, leaving behind only manuscripts, instruments, and the crystal, now glowing with an eerie inner light, and the diary ended with Ash promising to confront him, yet nothing more was found, no trace of the clergyman, only the shards of memory of a man who had sought to master the immaterial, a presence felt as much as seen, a story whispered in every street, and though time passed, the legend of Alaric Vane and his luminous sphere endured, for those brave enough to look into the crystal saw a face sorrowful, aware, eternal, and thus the townsfolk learned that knowledge and power carry a price beyond comprehension, that curiosity unchecked may summon forces no man can contain, and that in the quietest hour, when the lamps flicker and the wind carries voices from graves unknown, the shadow of the magician remains, a reminder that life and death are but threads to be tugged, woven, and undone by a will unafraid of the abyss. As the weeks wore on, the house of Ravenscroft became the locus of whispers and superstition, for the villagers swore that from its darkened windows came not merely light but a low, humming vibration that seemed to unsettle the air itself, and travelers who passed the manor on foggy nights reported glimpses of a tall figure moving among the shadows, while on rare occasions a sudden flare of blue fire shot from the upper windows, crackling like lightning imprisoned within glass, and though the magistrate received several complaints, he dismissed them as the folly of imagination, yet Reverend Ash, though missing for many days, left his diary with instructions for careful observation, and those who dared to enter the manor spoke of halls lined with books that seemed older than memory, shelves that bent beneath the weight not merely of paper but of knowledge too vast for ordinary comprehension, and instruments whose purpose defied all conventional science, some that dripped a thick, glimmering fluid from slender tubes, others that spun with a soundless motion, and at the center of it all sat Dr. Alaric Vane, his gray eyes luminous, hands delicate yet deliberate, moving in a rhythm both mechanical and natural, murmuring incantations that blended the arcane with the scientific, and the crystal sphere rested upon a pedestal of black marble, pulsing faintly like a heart beating at the edge of time, while the air seemed thick with the weight of anticipation, as if the very walls awaited some hidden event, and outside, the town grew restless, windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and children told tales of ghostly voices and of shadows moving independently of their owners, and one evening, a daring youth named Thomas, armed with curiosity and the reckless courage of youth, crept into the manor, slipping past creaking doors and along corridors lined with portraits whose eyes appeared to follow his every step, drawn inexorably toward the central chamber where a faint golden light spilled from beneath the door, and as he entered, Thomas beheld Dr. Vane in a moment of ritualistic stillness, hands extended over the sphere as it floated midair, the glow now bright enough to illuminate the entire room, revealing dust motes that danced like spirits in a sunbeam, and the boy froze, sensing the magnitude of the act before him. For Vane's voice rose and fell in cadences that seemed at once musical and mathematical, and the sphere swirled with colors unnameable. Not merely light but substance, something alive and aware, and then, as if sensing Thomas's presence, Vane turned, his gaze falling upon the boy with an intensity that seemed to pierce through thought and flesh alike, and he smiled faintly, a smile that was both welcoming and terrifying, and Thomas felt a tremor pass through him, as though the very floor of reality wavered beneath his feet, and Vane spoke, his voice low but carrying the authority of command. You see, young man, the soul is but energy, and energy may be captured, contained, and awakened. Death is not cessation but transformation. Tonight, you shall witness the truth of this law. And before Thomas could protest, the crystal leapt higher, spinning faster, its internal light expanding to fill the chamber, and a sudden wind, imperceptible yet felt, whipped through the room, lifting papers, sending loose instruments clattering, yet the sphere remained steady, like the eye of a storm, and then the colors within coalesced into a form vaguely human, a silhouette that shimmered with iridescence, and a voice, soft but unmistakable, whispered from the sphere, calling the name of Thomas's lost sister, a child who had vanished many months prior, and the boy, heart-hammering, recognized her tone, fragile and frightened, as if she were trapped between worlds, and he cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of energy building within the crystal, and Vane extended his hand, his expression serene. Observe, for this is not illusion. This is mastery over the final boundary. The essence of life may yet speak. And then, a pulse, radiant and overwhelming, shot from the sphere, bathing Thomas and Vane in light so intense that he felt as if his very mind had dissolved and remade itself, and in that moment, he saw visions, cities rising and falling, men and women experiencing joy and sorrow, animals living and dying. The continuum of existence laid bare before him, and within the storm of perception, he perceived Alaric Vane's purpose. He was not merely a seeker of knowledge but a harbinger, a man daring To bend the immutable laws for the sake of discovery, yet each success carried cost, for Thomas glimpsed shadows at the edges of the light, forms of previous experiments, souls caught in half-life, some contorted, silent, and anguished, and he understood the price of curiosity, the danger of claiming dominion over the natural order, and before he could speak or flee, the crystal emitted a soundless explosion of awareness, a pulse that seared memory and time alike, and Thomas collapsed. Unconscious, while Vane remained upright, eyes shining with triumph and a touch of sorrow, and when the boy awoke hours later in his own bed at home, unsure how he returned, he found that the house was silent, the storm outside abated, yet the memory of the sphere and the imprisoned voices remained vivid, and he knew that Alaric Vane's work had not ended, only shifted, that somewhere in the shadows of Ravenscroft Manor, the magician continued to manipulate forces beyond mortal reckoning, and the town of Ashcroft, ignorant of the exact nature of the events that had transpired, continued life as best it could, yet a palpable tension lingered in the air, a sense that reality itself had been brushed against a dimension too immense and terrifying for ordinary comprehension, and whispers persisted of blue fire flickering from the windows at night, of strange hums beneath the earth, and of children waking in terror from dreams of voices not their own, and travelers who passed through swore they felt eyes upon them from the hills, and that when the wind moaned across the river bank, it carried faint echoes of words no tongue should utter, and so Dr. Alaric Vane became legend even as he remained flesh and blood, a man of science and magic intertwined, whose pursuit of ultimate knowledge had expanded the boundaries of possibility while darkening the hearts of those who dared witness it, and in the years to come, every attempt to describe him failed, for his intellect and purpose were singular, his presence a paradox, and the crystal, glowing faintly in a hidden chamber, continued to pulse with the rhythm of existence itself, a silent testament to the fact that while the body may perish, the essence, the energy, the very spark of consciousness, may yet endure, and for those who dared to look too long into its depths, the warning was clear: mastery comes at a cost, curiosity may summon forces unforeseen, and the magician's hand reaches always beyond, touching realms unseen, reshaping the world in ways both wondrous and terrible, until all who encounter him are forced to reckon with the unalterable truth that knowledge is power, and power, when unfettered, becomes both salvation and damnation. The days turned to weeks, and whispers of Dr. Vane's continued experiments spread beyond Ashcroft, carried on the wind to neighboring villages and the ears of scholars who had once dismissed the town as provincial, and though none dared approach Ravenscroft Manor directly, reports came of lights dancing in impossible colors across the windows, of shadows that moved independently of their owners, and of an unearthly hum that seemed to vibrate the very air, and inside the house, Alaric Vane's obsession intensified, for he had begun to understand that the energy of the soul could be shaped, directed, and, in a sense, imprisoned to serve as a lens through which time, memory, and even emotion could be perceived, and in pursuit of this ultimate knowledge he worked tirelessly, often days without food, speaking in low cadences that harmonized with the oscillations of the crystal sphere, and one evening, as a thunderstorm raged with an unrelenting fury, a sudden convulsion of light burst forth from the central chamber, illuminating the hills around Ashcroft with a brilliance that rivaled lightning itself, and the townsfolk, drawn to the spectacle by terror and curiosity, gathered at a safe distance, shielding their eyes as the glow intensified, casting long, twisting shadows across the river and the cobbled streets, and within the mansion, Vane's final experiment reached its climax, for he had succeeded in drawing forth not merely the faint echoes of past lives, but the energy of the living, anchoring it to the sphere, binding consciousness to crystal, and as he whispered the final words, the air quivered, objects trembled, and a soundless wave of power surged through the house like the pulse of the earth itself, and in that instant, time seemed to fracture, bending inward and outward, revealing visions of the future and past simultaneously, cities rising and falling, men and women living and dying, and the faces of those he had loved and lost appearing, as though he had captured the essence of existence itself. Yet with triumph came catastrophe, for the energy proved too vast, too wild for mortal containment, and the sphere erupted in blinding brilliance, shattering instruments, splintering wood, and sending a shockwave that hurled Dr. Vane across the chamber, leaving him sprawled but alive, eyes wide with both horror and revelation. And outside, the villagers screamed as walls shook and the roof seemed to lift, the manor itself groaning under the strain of forces far beyond ordinary comprehension. And when the light finally faded, the storm subsided, and silence descended, the townspeople dared to approach, finding the house scarred, windows shattered, and the air thick with the acrid tang of ozone, yet no trace of the magician could be found, only the crystal, now dull, resting upon the floor, pulsing faintly as if it still breathed, and some claimed to hear whispers emanating from within, voices of those whose essence had been bound, calling softly for release, and though many fled in fear, some braver souls remained, peering into the remnants of the sphere and swearing they glimpsed a figure, tall, gray-eyed, serene, watching them, not corporeal yet undeniably present. And in the weeks that followed, Ashcroft struggled to return to normal, though life carried the residue of that night, the knowledge that forces existed beyond mortal reckoning, and that one man's obsession had touched the fabric of the world itself, altering it forever. And the diary of Reverend Ash was discovered at last in a hidden chamber, its final pages describing in meticulous detail the power, the ambition, and the inevitable peril of Vane's pursuit, warning that no mortal should attempt what he had done, that curiosity unchecked could summon forces capable of unraveling mind, body, and soul, and that even in triumph, the cost is immeasurable. And over the following months, children of the town reported fleeting glimpses of shadowed figures in the woods, of voices calling their names in the dead of night, and travelers who passed the hills swore the mansion exhaled a strange wind, carrying faint murmurs from another world. And the crystal, though diminished in brilliance, remained a nexus of potential, an artifact both feared and revered, a reminder that Dr. Alaric Vane's genius had not died but merely transcended, leaving behind a legacy that would haunt Ashcroft for generations. And in time, the story became legend, told in hushed tones around hearts, with the admonition that the pursuit of ultimate knowledge is fraught with danger, and that the line between life and death, the material and the immaterial, may be crossed, but at the price of everything one holds dear. And thus, the magician's tale endured, a continuous thread weaving through memory and dream, a cautionary chronicle of a man who dared to master the unseen, whose brilliance and folly became inseparable, and whose presence, though unseen by most, lingered in the flicker of lamps, the whisper of wind, the pulse of the crystal, and the hearts of all who remembered the fear and awe he had inspired, reminding the living that some knowledge is too vast for mortal minds, and some power too profound for human hands, and that while the body may vanish, the essence, the energy, the will that dared to reach beyond the veil, remains, eternal, unbroken, a whisper in the darkness, a shadow in the light, the enduring enigma of the magician, Alaric Vane.